Now, we know intergenerational inequality is growing and growing rapidly, and the cost of university degrees and the HECS or help debt as it's known today plays a major part in that generational inequality. My parents' generation had free university. My generation, we had a system that did not burden us with too much debt. What we are now seeing, what I'm seeing with my children and their friends and so many of the younger generation, is they are burdened by, I would say, nearly an unconscionable debt when it comes to how they are going to face their prospects. It will impact young people's ability to get ahead. We know some 2.9 million Australians have some form of help debt, and it takes them close to 10 years to repay it in full if they are so lucky to be able to. The current help system impacts the number of young people attending university to be our future workforce. And it also impacts how they choose their subjects and what they are looking at. But it also impacts older Australians that are returning to university to retain or gain further qualifications. And we need them. We need more people to be considering this. We know current younger generation will have up to 10 different jobs or career in their work life, right? It's changing dramatically. And that will mean retraining. And we can't have a situation where to meet our skills demand, which we want people to do, especially people, older Australians, where maybe an industry they've been in is a dying industry or something where the prospects are not there, but there are new opportunities and requires retraining. We're not burdening them with so much debt that there's a disincentive to go forward and do that. We know also many in that category in relation to retraining or gaining further qualifications, that it's all too often it's women, older women, and that really impacts them and creates a really big inequity. So I'm strongly urging the government, and I support this bill. We must do all we can to ensure younger generations and those looking to retrain and upskill can do so confidently without being burdened by this unreasonable amount of debt. We know so much of our economic future as a nation relies and is linked to many being able to retrain and us being able to fill all the areas where we have significant skill shortages. So this bill is a start, but let's get real, much more needs to be done. And that includes the further reform when it comes to how and when indexation of help loans occur. It's just unacceptable that the ATO can withhold from someone's salary, from their pay, a help loan repayment on a monthly basis from their salaries during the year, but that amount is not applied to their help debt in real time. Essentially, indexation is applied to help loans by the ATO on the 1st of June each year, but the ATO does not process the loan repayments that it has withheld, that a person has not had the benefit of, until after personal tax returns are processed. So you have this inequity whereby, despite payments being withheld from someone's pay, that's not applied to reduce the debt that is ultimately indexed and grows. So whilst it is a welcome change in this legislation, it just does not make sense that this system, the timing and how indexation occurs, continues to be as it currently is. So the government should legislation to either allow for repayments in real time or move the day of indexation from 1 June to later in the calendar year to reduce the burden on those paying back their debt and stop the double-dipping effect, in essence, that it has on people with their help loans. It's certainly not a system we see in any other real area that the ATO engages in, and it's just quite nonsensical that it remains in this case. The government, I know, is well aware of this, and I thank the Minister for the discussions around this, but I think we need to hurry up with the change. This really is a burden on top of so many younger people and people that are looking to further their skills, to retrain and do further study. But I do acknowledge that this bill represents progress, and especially progress when it comes to the huge mobilisation of young people in our communities who called on the government to do this. In fact, we first met with the Minister back in 1st of June 2023 and raising the issue because at the time we had this situation of 7.1% of indexation, meaning debts were just growing at a rate that was incredibly alarming for so many. So what this bill does, the help debt indexation rate will now be linked to either the consumer price index or the wage price index, whichever is lower. So that is welcome. That is creating a significant reduction. And it is also really good to see the establishment of the Commonwealth prac payment. This payment will support students undertaking mandatory workplace placements required for university and vocational education qualifications. So it's good progress. We know having to attend that vocational placement is often prescriptive and just simply unaffordable for many. So I know that measure will go some way to alleviating the placement poverty that many have faced. However, it is still picking winners, where we're only covering some placements, not all mandatory placements under certain qualifications. And I've raised that with the Minister, and the answer was simple, that ultimately it's a budgeting question and that at the moment it's a question of picking priorities. Now, I would argue that this is an important aspect. If we're going to fill skill shortages, we need to make sure any qualification that requires a vocational placement has access to the prac payment. So it's a good start, but I think more needs to be done to reform the student debt system and support those already in study. Now, there's no doubt that a lot of the work and the progress of this bill is as a result of the final reports of the Universities Accord. And that important work, led by Professor Mary O'Kane AC, with some expert support from a range of individuals with expertise in higher education. And it's important to note the final aspects in that report, that higher education is integral to Australia's future and that the knowledge, skills and research it produces enables us to be an economically prosperous, socially equitable and environmentally sustainable nation. If we do not invest in our future in training and in qualifications, we simply will not be at the table of the future economy of a net zero world, and we're really selling our future generations short if we don't take care of that. We're already having pressure. We know there are a lot of pressures around many sectors in relation to skills shortages. We need more teachers from early childhood through to secondary, more doctors and nurses, more engineers and skills tradespeople. It's particularly key as we look to that transition to the net zero economy. In the next 5 years, 90% of new jobs will demand tertiary education, yet we're seeing a decrease in completion of bachelor degrees and a worsening skilled worker shortage looms. For example, in the area of, for example, AUKUS, we know there is going to be a significant demand for engineers, and there's a requirement that they be Australian-born or Australian citizen engineers. We don't qualify anywhere near the necessary number of engineers through our university system to meet that demand. That's just AUKUS alone, let alone the requirement we know we will have around the transition to clean energy and the transition of so many of our industries need to do. And so that's just one other area where we don't talk about it enough, but this is a major problem to many. We know the cost of living crisis and the spike in inflation hasn't helped around the sector and this debt. It's put many under pressure. And I know, for example, many businesses in Warringah are also deeply affected by skill shortages. And it's where we need to really look for innovation. We need to look for ways to get efficiencies and to really support so many more of our industries. For the government to meet Australia's needs and create the future we want for our society, our education system needs to be equitable, especially for marginalised groups. So I do wholeheartedly support the bill. It shifts the dial ever so slightly on an issue of fairness and an equitable future. And I want to thank all the many who raised their voice on this issue, because it's a real power of, I guess, democracy in putting pressure on government to move on an issue. And I think it's also an important one from a gender equality point of view. We know many women are impacted by this. According to the 2022-2023 Australian Tax Office data, women make up to 60% of those who still owe repayments on their help debts. The average debt is $26,000, and women's debts are larger because they owe 58% of the overall debt. Writing for Australia's agenda earlier this year, Dr Marge Rogers noted that the indexation of help debt is more likely to hit women harder as women take longer to pay off their student loans. And that, unfortunately, is because women, amongst other factors, take more career breaks to care for children and other members of their families, are more likely to work part-time, reducing their income and amount they repay. They earn less in feminised care industries, they earn less overall, and they're more economically impacted during a relationship breakdown, and then struggle to work in regional, rural and remote locations due to the lack of services such as early learning, disability care and aged care. But still, young women studying at universities are set to benefit from the measures in this bill. The prac payments for those training in teaching, nursing, midwifery and social work is a welcome development. From July 2025, eligible students will be able to access some $319.50 per week while they are undertaking a placement. A means test will apply. The placement poverty is a real issue, including for those in Warringah, and I am glad that there is now a program in place to help alleviate that for them. And yes, of course, many of those in those sectors, these are highly feminised sectors. According to the statistics of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, women make up almost 3/4 of education and health students at Australian University. In nursing, nearly 90% of the workforce in Australia are women. So there's no doubt that this is another step that the government has taken in relation to greater gender equality, and I very much welcome it. That, along with paid parental leave, superannuation and childcare, are all steps in the right direction, but of course more can be done. There are issues such, whilst the debt write-off, indexation change and prac payments in the bill are welcome, they are a start. For example, there are many recommendations remaining under the Universities Accord, and I encourage the government to act on the further changes before the end of this year, in particular that change to the indexation date that I referred to earlier. We know that will make tangible difference to students, and we really need to go a lot further. I've received a lot of positive feedback from Warringah residents and students when it was announced, many who had in fact signed the petition from the member for Kooyong, many medical students, veterinary students, and those studying to become psychologists will miss out. And these are key industries that we know we have major shortages. So I encourage the government to also look to medical students, veterinary students, those starting to become psychologists, and all other areas requiring prac placements. So anyone where there's a practical element in their degree who cannot access the payment. Now, in the last Parliament, the Morrison government also introduced some very controversial changes to the cost of tertiary education, in particular when it came to humanities degrees. I strongly opposed those changes then, and I call on the government to revisit and reverse the decision that did. It really inappropriately substantially increase the cost of humanities degrees compared to others. As a society, we need all levels of education. We really will benefit from having all areas available to many, especially young people. And so I think it's really important that whilst the government is making improvements here, that it really look to reviewing the changes that were done by the previous government when it came to the cost of university degrees, in particular humanities degrees. I know there's a number of amendments that will be discussed that will go to some of the points that I've raised, and so I look forward to the further questions with the Minister in relation to that process. But I do commend the government for taking this good first step in relation to this problem.